Four Knights of the Apocalypse Chapter 125 is now out, and I have to be completely honest, this was a good chapter. However, I can see, based off of some of the dialogue spoken and how this chapter ended, it'll be a pretty divisive chapter amongst the fan base. I don't think it's going to be outright hated, but I think it's definitely going to be divisive on people thinking it's going to be good, bad, indifferent towards it, you know, all that. But it wasn't a terrible chapter by any means. I personally enjoyed it, probably because I'm like a huge Lancelot fan, and I love Nanashi as well in this chapter too. So I kind of liked their interaction and how things played out. Personally, I think things should have gone a little longer, but we still have one more thing to go for with this arc before it concludes, so I kind of see why it had to be the way it is. But I'll get all that in detail when we get into the actual review. But before anything, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps, it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and you want to see more. Outside of these manga chapter reviews, I also started to review the anime of Four Knights of the Apocalypse based on my manga reading experience, and to see how well the anime is doing, and so far I'm enjoying what I'm seeing. I'm going to see how long I can maintain doing weekly reviews of both the anime and the manga, as well as some shorts here and there for your viewing pleasure. I've also got some other anime and manga I want to talk about in between whenever I get the opportunity to, so look forward to all of that. Now with that out of the way, let's get right into the chapter. So Chapter 125 of Four Knights of the Apocalypse, titled Knights of War, with probably one of my favorite cover images, which is just a young Lancelot seemingly training with his father Bon. Now this is actually the first time we properly see Bon drawn in his like older, more current art style and look from like the Lancelot one-shot. I look entirely differently when we see him when we eventually get to Benwick, but it's just nice to see Bon properly drawn in the Four Knights manga. The last time we actually saw him drawn in manga form was literally in the Lancelot one-shot and then in a cover image, but that is just his like design from Seven Deadly Sins around the Ten Commandments saga. So that kind of goes to show this is the latest update on Bon in the manga, and we only had a silhouette previously at the end of Leonis. So I just can't wait to see what Bon looks like. Can't wait to see a proper interaction between Lancelot and Bon. I've been looking forward to that for the longest time now. So here's hoping we get to see it. But anyway, the chapter begins directly where last week left off, with Lancelot saying he's about to get serious as he explodes with his magical power and the aura surrounding him. And Nanashi is taken aback by the intensity of this magical power, as he goes on to say how he heard about him from Arthur and how he fought Arthur once. And Arthur even acknowledged that Lancelot had outclassed any seasoned warrior that he had seen from both intuition, courage, and strength-wise, which is crazy to think about because right now, the other, outside of Arthur, the strongest characters in the verse right now are probably like Meliodas, Bon, King, Deanne, Merlin, you know, the Sins, then Arthur. I would have expected all of them to be on relatively even levels of strength with Arthur, just being a little bit higher due to the fact that he has the power of chaos. But with this acknowledgement, it's very possible that Lancelot is not just on the level of the Sins, but could potentially be stronger than even Meliodas or Bon. Again, no telling how this is, because remember, we have no idea if Arthur actually fought seriously against the Sins in these past 16 years. So this is probably based off his idea of how strong the Sins were before this time skip, and on a handicapped Meliodas in the Leonis arc. So I'm going on a nice middle ground that he's around the level of the Sins, but hasn't surpassed them just yet. That's my interpretation of this, and I think that's the most likely. Online Dog is going to get the fandom in an uproar on like the legitimacy of Lancelot's strength, which I kind of understand. But moving on, because this is still the first page. Nanashi also goes on to state how Arthur told him Lancelot is right-handed, but he was previously fighting with his left, and wonders if the answer to that is the fact that his arm was either hurt prior, or it's some sort of limitation based on his magical power, which people have speculated on ad nauseum ever since, you know, Lancelot tried to fight Arthur by unleashing his full power when he swapped up his stance. Many people thought it was a limitation or a restriction he placed on himself to keep his power in check. I thought this as well. But Lancelot then reveals that that is not the reason. And the true reason why he followed his left hand instead of his right hand to begin with, it's because being ambidextrous is cooler. And he says that he was training with his left hand that entire part of the series at this point. Which, it's funny. It's just a funny answer. It's a funny answer to something that fans have just been speculating on ad nauseum over the last year on why Lancelot was going with his left instead of his right, which is his dominant hand. And maybe it's a limitation, or maybe his hand was injured or something. But no, he was just training himself to fight left-handed. That is the crazy thing. And I'm like, wow, this does, based on what we saw from Lancelot earlier in this arc, this fits him to a T. He likes to have fun and challenge himself. And to train to make sure everyone's at top level. It makes sense that he would put himself in some sort of bizarre training regiment, even in the middle of a fight. So, yeah, he's going all out and he's fighting with his dominant hand. But he's just been trained to be ambidextrous just because it'd be cooler and because it'd be more useful. Which even Nanashi's like, is that the only reason? And yeah, Lancelot confirms, yeah, it is. Is that a problem? But when Nanashi says no, Lancelot does fully commit to serious mode and says, how about I sell this now? I'm concerned about my friends anyway. Then when Lancelot moves his feet, Nanashi notices something. As Lancelot gets into a fighting stance, Nanashi jumps up into the air and generates his goddess wings from his magic power, like how Tristan has done so, and even Elizabeth. As he says, you have a good eye. As he then generates a giant cross in the sky. As he says, it's time for me to fully gauge you with my greatest of abilities. As Tristan and Gawain and Schwartz notice that huge ball of magic power up in the air. And that is also Lancelot, as well as the goddess member's power, as now it seems like that huge cross is about to be released onto the area. Nanashi then swipes his sword, using his magic power to create his secret skill, Setsuna Jujise, or Instant Cross Star, as a giant cross slash goes down towards Lancelot and the giant ball of magical energy that he is generating. And Lancelot prepares to take this force flat out, no dodging, as it hits its mark, as we see the huge explosion from the impact. Nanashi in the sky says that this was the only way to test you out fully. Going on to even say that this attack actually gravely injured Arthur himself at one point, asking Lancelot if he can withstand it. Do you truly have what it takes to defeat Arthur in battle or not? And Nanashi is shocked when Lancelot basically nonchalantly says, well, mind telling me what this thing is? As we see that the huge cross, the slash attack made from the celestial cross that Nanashi made, is now around Lancelot's ball of magic power that is around Lancelot. It did not just crash and explode, it is now circulating around it, which shocks even Nanashi, saying that it's impossible, that he's not even hurt. How is he doing this? How he managed to just survive this without even dodging his most secretive skills, and even erase it from existence? By looking again, he notices that it's not erased. It's being absorbed. Like, as he goes on with the analogy, like a mighty river swallowing up its tributaries with ease. Now I know for sure the true nature of his magic power. Now, before I get into what happens next, this does more or less kind of explain what Lancelot's power seemingly is. He essentially absorbed this magical attack. Now, we could chop this up to the fact that he's Bond's son, and this is just Lancelot's own ability similar to Snatch, which it does kind of make sense for him to have an ability similar to Bond's, as a lot of times magical power can also be genetic from what we can tell. But another thing that's possible, and this also makes very much sense, is something that I saw in the 7 Deadly Sins Discord server. And this was brought up, the fact that this is most likely a similar effect that happened with the Lady of the Lake. More specifically, the lake that she resides in. An aspect that it can absorb magical power and compress it within itself. And since at the end of the Lancelot one-shot, it was stated that Lancelot was also known as the Prince of the Lake, it's very possible that Lancelot's magic power basically adapted and changed based off the area that he was in, and perhaps maybe meeting the Lady of the Lake, now his magical power's true essence is to take in and absorb magical power and add it onto himself. That is also a very strong possibility from my interpretation of this thing. And that could very well be the case, and why he is this strong. If he could absorb magical attacks from other characters, then it makes sense why he would be this powerful. But until we get a concrete explanation in the actual manga, this is just my interpretation of this, as well as some fans. So take this with a grain of salt, but these two options do seem very likely. But right as Nanashi realizes the true nature of his magical power, Lancelot immediately, without any warning, kicks Nanashi square in the chest. From one page turn, a double page spread of Lancelot just landing a critical blow against Nanashi, with Nanashi even noticing that he didn't realize when Lancelot even moved. He didn't even know where he came from. So Lancelot's movement was almost instantaneous. It was that fast enough for even Nanashi not to be able to see, which is crazy. As Lancelot only puts more salt in the wound by calling out to Nanashi, stating, "No name, you are pretty decent," as he kicks Nanashi further into the distance, crashing into some mountains, as he then lands. Now, another thing that could be kind of divisive, he called someone who fans speculate could be a former archangel, someone who's very powerful, as a decent fight. A decent fight. Not a good fight, but a pretty decent fight. Which is crazy to think about, and Lancelot might just be too strong at this point. I feel like we're getting into the Gojo conundrum from Jujutsu Kaisen, where we have a character that's just so powerful that any tension could be taken out if he's on the scene. And a similar thing with like that with Escanor in Seven Deadly Sins, but his power was basically based off a time limit, so tension was only always basically available. It's just certain instances where Escanor could be, the thing that could save the day. However, with Gojo, if you read Jujutsu Kaisen, you know that there are reasons why Gege Akutami had to write him out of the story for certain instances up to where the anime is at this point. And it was simply Gojo was too strong, and I'm afraid we're reaching this point with Lancelot based off of this fight. And while I enjoyed this fight, and while I think this was a really good fight, and once I get to the ending of this chapter, something that honestly makes me very happy, and also adds more to Lancelot, is the fact that he can seemingly absorb magic power, and it can be presumably added onto himself. He was stated by Arthur to be a level above seasoned fighters that Arthur has seen, which can include pre-time skip sins. And he basically one-shot a powerful Goddess Clan member from what we can tell. So, yeah, we're reaching the point where Lancelot is probably too strong for the story to handle, and Naka is probably going to have to come up with a clever way to either weaken him, or just escalate the stakes even more in power of other characters that they're going to have to fight against. But that's just my honest opinion. I still enjoyed this, but I do fear we're reaching that point. And Lancelot is most likely to have reached the level of the strongest, the next Gojo of manga. I'm calling it now. I found a funny edit on the Seven Deadly Sins Reddit, and I just want to post it on here because this is just fucking hilarious, and it fits so well with Lancelot at this current point in the story. But anyway, we cut to Nanashi as he's reminiscing about things, going into his background and his history with Arthur, as he states that he rejected the gods he once served, and as punishment, his wings were plucked off. And so he spent ages wandering, unable to find any reason to keep living, until one day he found a new master that he could wager his life to serve, stating that that was in fact Arthur, a child king who had eyes that shone like bright stars, as clear as a cloudless sky, so young but looked so far into the future, and hoping those living in it could be happy. And so he managed to resolve himself to serve Arthur as a protective sword, and give it his all no matter what. Time passed, and Arthur's eyes were darkened by scornful hatred for the other clans. Some of his faithful aides even left his side, saying that he had changed, much as the gods that Nanashi himself had once worshipped. So, obviously, Vargas is definitely one of them, because he was someone that betrayed Arthur and left with Percival. That's a given. But it also implies that there are others that left Arthur's side. Obviously, most likely Merlin, since Merlin is gone. So, I'm wondering what's going to happen next, if there's anybody else. But right now, Merlin, Vargas. Vargas is dead. We have no idea what's going on with Merlin. So we're probably going to have to meet Merlin next, now that we met Nanashi. But Nanashi goes on to lament that he himself wants to believe that King Arthur is still truly kind and just, dreaming of a peaceful world for all of Britannia. But with Arthur's power growing beyond a reasonable level, he doubts he could ever open his eyes to the dream that he once had to be the pure and kind king that he once was. As Lancelot chimes in and says, and that's why you wanted to see for yourself, huh? As Nanashi wakes up from basically being planted into the ground by Lancelot, with Gawain and Tristan walking to go and see Lancelot with the conclusion of this fight. Lancelot goes on to say, like, you wanted to do this because you wanted to see whether or not we had the kind of power needed to open up Arthur's eyes. Lancelot says, I honestly don't have any duty to do so, but don't worry about it. We'll be beating him senseless for sure at least. And Nanashi realizes that Lancelot can read minds, and Lancelot just goes on to say, well, someone as quiet as you is a lot more eloquent in their sleep. And I just like this little moment that the two of them literally respect each other. It's an air of respect between two fighters, and I kind of like it. And Lancelot even says, you see me now. What do you think? Nanashi says, it's been quite a while since I felt so refreshed. He calls it to Lancelot and hands over his sword. States it might be too dull for him, but he wants to give it to him in compensation for his bow that he destroyed in their fight. Lancelot picks it up and says, huh. A dull sword, thank you. Nanashi laughs and says, come on, don't be that way. It's the handiwork of Dabuzu, the great swordsmith. I call it Shirojika, or white deer. Now, really quick, I don't know if this is a strange translation at all. I don't know if there's a mistranslation. A part of me wants to think, maybe is he talking about Dubs, the master craftsman, the giants, and this sword was made by Dubs, and that's why it's so strong and why it could help Lancelot. It also helps that it's a weapon that Lancelot didn't instantly destroy with Shining Road when he infuses magic power into it. So obviously that helps. But could this also be like a different thing, like an actual character who is a swordsmith in the world of Britannia that could be on the level of Dubs? And that's another piece of world building? Or am I looking too into this? It's very possible this is just another name for Dubs that Nanashi gave to him or something, but it is what it is. Anyway, Lancelot says, a dull blade from Dabuzu, huh? Neat. I'll take it then. He starts twirling the sword and starts humming around as he goes to meet Tristan and Gawain, basically showing off the new sword he got, as Nanashi says that it belongs to you now. You and your stout friends. Ending the chapter. So, like I said, I honestly enjoyed this chapter, but based on the dialogue and the implications of what we got, it's very possible that Lancelot might be too strong for a story to properly keep the stakes intact. But I do believe that Nakba will come up with a way to make things a bit more, how should I say, compelling when in terms of actual conflict for the main characters and not have Lancelot bail them out a lot. I mean, we do have stakes in this arc as well, considering everybody had their own fights and Lancelot didn't have to bail them out. But having someone like Lancelot, who is most likely on the level of the Sins at the bare minimum, in their group does diminish some of the stakes. But since he's not going to be there fighting side by side in certain instances, there is still stakes. But I want to see how this plays out. I don't want to jump the gun. Not to mention, we also got a nice sword for Lancelot. He's down a bow, but he's got a nice sword that was able to withstand his magic power. And if this is a, well, mistranslation, but this could potentially, if this is a weapon from Dubs, then I guess Lancelot got a sacred treasure type item for him, or at least a powerful magic item that he could use in battle. It's dull, but it won't matter to Lancelot, as all he needs to do is infuse his magic power into it to make it a deadly weapon, and he could just use it to unleash Shining Road. And the fight overall between Nanashi and Lancelot was honestly as exciting as I hoped it to be. I wanted it to be a bit more, how should I say, push Lancelot a bit more in this fight to make things a bit more high stakes. I'm still happy with how things turned out. It's just some of the implications, as I mentioned earlier, could implement that Lancelot is a bit too strong for the story at this point, but Nakaba could still end up rectifying that at some way, and I kind of look forward to seeing how Lancelot is handled in the future. Nanashi became a much more interesting character, especially with this chapter, and I like how it acknowledges that he still served Arthur despite the changes that happened to him over the course of his power, just continuously growing and evolving over these last couple of years. And he did kind of hope for the Four Knights to be strong enough to like open up Arthur's eyes and knock him back to his senses. But there's also something that Meliodas promised to do for Arthur if he ever lost his way. So I kind of like that the people that knew Arthur closely as a friend and one as basically someone who is his right hand wants Arthur to go back to the person that he was. And I like that, and I want to see how this will play out. But yeah, that was basically the chapter. I had a lot of tangents to go on with this video. I did not mean to make this almost 20 minutes long, so I feel really bad for my editor for this one. I am so sorry. But yeah, this was a good chapter. I can see it being divisive, but again, Nakaba could rectify this and make things a bit better. But that's all pure speculation at this point. And honestly, I can't wait to see what happens with the next chapter, as we still have the conclusion of Percival versus Mortlich. And I feel like Nakaba's saving things for a big epic conclusion for Percival and his one-on-one confrontation. But what did you guys think? Leave your thoughts, opinions, and theories in the comment section down below. And if you haven't already, once more, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps and shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and want me to see and do more. And with all that said and done, I hope you all have an awesome day.